All right, welcome back. This video is going to be about majorly auto scaling, how you could scale up and down your application based on certain load. Maybe you're working on an e-commerce application, or you're working on some sort of in some sort of festive season, and you know that maybe it's a Black Friday season or a New Year Eve or a Christmas, and you're going to receive a lot of requests from your customers, and they will be placing the order, which means you need to scale up or scale out your application so that your infrastructure is scalable enough and your application can serve to your customer. How do you do that? So in the on-premise world, you keep adding the hardwares and there are a lot of costing to it. How do you do that into cloud world, or rather Azure? So Azure gives you the benefit of increasing up or out your infrastructure basis on certain needs, basis on certain metrics, certain timestamp, and they come out of box. You don't have to set up something on your own. You don't have to write any custom scripts. All of them are available, and you could just go ahead and use them. How do you do that? Before we begin, before we get in the hands-on session, the auto scaling is supported only on standard, premium, or the isolated version. If you're using a free just like me, you won't be able to use the auto scaling on all those cool features. And how do you change the plan? So on the left hand side, underneath the settings, you see two type of scaling: scale up or scale out. So scale up is generally up speaks up for itself. You scale the number and the power of your resources up or down. For instance, you provision a bigger server, give a more horsepower to your server whenever the load come in. So let's suppose this is only comes with a 1 GB memory and some sort of one core of machine. Now if you want to increase it, you simply can increase it to 100 total ACUs with 1.7 gig of memory, and it comes with auto scaling, manual scaling as well. Now, and this yet doesn't support the auto scale features. For auto scale, you got to go to production or isolated. So if I go to the production and select one of these P series tier, you would be able to have the auto scaling of your machine. The scale up is more like adding more power to your machine, giving a more number of cores, giving high gig to your memory so that your machine is more inflated. It comes with a single machine, but with a huge power. So scale up, out, down, in, and there are basically two main type of scaling resources. One is your vertical, which is like scaling up and down, and horizontal is scaling out and in. So if you go to the scale out, you would see that there are two ways you can scale. One way is manual, and scale out is like increasing the number of hardware resources, increasing the number of virtual machine. In this case, increasing the number of app services instance in the backend. So scale out and in is like increasing the number of machines or number of instance in the backend, and scale up and down is like the vertical scaling, which means increasing the capacity, the horsepower of your machine. So if you go to the scale out, one way is manual scaling, which means you can just give, right now it's 20, right now it's only one instance you have got of your machine. And if you go to configure, you could manually scale it. Let's suppose you don't want one instance, you probably need a better number of machines. So you have got into 10, which means every time your instance count would be 10, even if it's not used. Maybe let's suppose during the weekends or off working hours, nobody is using your website, nobody's seeing your content, and you're still giving it a 10 machine or 10 instance count, which means rest of the 9 are not even being used. So what you could do is you just can keep it one and rather use an auto scale, which means bases on certain metrics. Let's suppose if your CPU utilization is more than 70%, then only scale up. If over the weekend, then only scale up. Rest of the time, rest of the 5 days, you can scale down and keep it to the lower number of the amount of resources you need. This way you could save resources and save cost both as well. So how do you get onto a custom auto scale, how do you configure a custom auto scale? So the first thing first, you can do it either using a metric or specific count. So you click on the custom auto scale and then you give it a name, auto scale created. You give the maximum number and the minimum number, and the default would always be 1. Now you add a scale condition. When do you want the scale condition to happen, to be triggered? Basis on the metrics. Now the metrics could be anything, maybe basis on the CPU utilization, basis on the on certain other values. So maybe it's CPU utilization, data in, data out, HTTP queue length, memory percentage, TCP closing, and all those sort of metrics. So if you click on the CPU percentage, you would see that you would set a percentage, like if my average CPU is more than, now this dotted line is the one which wherein you have configured the triggered for. So if my last 10 minutes, over the last 10 minutes, if my CPU utilization is 60%, just increase the count by certain number. Now there's something called as cooldown minutes, which means the cooldown period is the period to prevent another trigger of scale operation, which means after 60 percentage of CPU, wait for 5 minutes and then only perform any operation, otherwise it'll keep trying. So that's about the scaling rule. Pretty simple, pretty straightforward. And if you hit uncancel, there's something called as scale to a specific instance count for certain period. So let's suppose you know that every day at 5 p.m. some sort of at 5 p.m. your traffic increases, because that's where you've been working on. Maybe it's a social media platform, or it's a gym platform, fitness platform, wherein people after the office start hitting the website and give queries. So you know that uh, every day at 5 p.m. probably I'm gonna so right now it's 3:34. I'm gonna probably give it as 3:37 and gonna give it a PM. Alright, and I would want that at 3:37 my maximum count should increase to 4. Yeah, 4, and the default is 1. I'm gonna hit on save and it is configuring. So right now it is 34 and our number of instances is by default 1. Instance count is 1 at the moment. And if you go to the run history, there hasn't been any run history, nothing has been run yet. I also want to get notified whenever whenever the auto scaling is triggered. So I'm going to hit on save, and if you go to the overview, you would see that my scaling is only 1. So one over here, 2:1 is to 1. The 1 denotes that there are only one instance and there's nothing been triggered yet. So if you go to the code red and if you go to the email, there hasn't been any new email of trigger. So what's gonna happen after a couple of minutes is that that there's going to be email and our auto scaling would be triggered because we set the time as 3:36, and then we would see that the auto scaling has enabled and the increase of count is from now 1 to 4. So on the both of the settings, the app services and app services plan, you would see that there's something called as auto scale out, and don't get confused with that. Both of them kind of denotes the same configuration, so it's kind of same and doesn't matter from where you configure it. Alright, so if I'm gonna refresh and the time is now well beyond 3:36, I would see that the app services plan has been changed from 1 to 4, rightly yes. And if I go to my email, I'm one of the administrator, and if I just hit a refresh, I would see that okay, auto scaling has been triggered, and yeah, so the old capacity was 1 and the new capacity was 4, and it's showing me the UTC time zone and the subscription name with on which resource it has been performed. Yeah, that's easy how it is to trigger trigger an auto scale. Now whatever the end time you've given over the scale out, it would um, simply scale out during that time, and get a you would get a mm, notification as well that at this point of time the auto scaling was, and you would keep on getting a event of logs as well that at this point of time the scale up was initiated, and we've given a scale down for after a day, and during after a day we would see the logs of scale down as well. So yeah, this how easy how it is to, you don't have to write any custom scripts. The auto scaling is pretty, within a few minutes you would be able to uh, perform or configure an auto scaling for your application. And the best part is you don't have to pay anything extra, which means you only pay for the time which wherein you want your system to be scaled out or up, and the rest of the time you could just get back to the normal sizing and save few of the dollars for your company. That's about it. I hope this was informative. I'll see you in a while. Thank you.